Hello and welcome to the Life Well Led podcast, brought to you by Untapt. On this show, we have conversations aimed at exploring and uncovering the art of a life well led. I'm your host, John Elliott, and today it is a family affair on the pod as I am joined by my twin brothers, Peter and Paul. Just a little bit of context. I am about 7 years older than them. So in most areas of life, I've sort of gone before them, whether it's, college, marriage, kids, etc. But not when it comes to podcasting. Not even close. They got there long before me, back in April of 2015, when they launched a baseball podcast that I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with, called A Foot in the Box. That ran for 3 years. They had an impressive 139 episode run. I was shocked to see that number when I looked it up last night. Interviewed some of the heaviest hitters in the sport. Now, we're not going to bore you with the exhaustive list, but trust me when I tell you the hitters were heavy. And some of you may remember the old Serial podcast that was running in about the same time, and Serial tends to get a lot of the credit for the podcasting boom that came thereafter, but I tend to think A Foot in the Box had a bigger role to play in that movement than what they get credit for. No, in all seriousness, it was really cool for me to see them put themselves out there in that way. That was before it was kind of normative for people to be doing podcasts. They had a lot of fun with it. They had me and our other brother Kevin on a few times, and we had a lot of fun being on with them. And I remember thinking at the time, it'd be really fun to do one of these someday of my own. And took me about a decade, but we're finally here. So Peter, Paul, thank you for breaking the seal on podcasting in the Elliott family, and for joining me on this final episode of my first season. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks for having us on, John. It's a privilege.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's start by talking a bit about A Foot in the Box. Would one of you guys want to just give the kind of the quick origin story of that venture?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that. Paul can fill in the gaps. So, big sports family. I think Paul and I really have liked baseball. Is maybe our favorite sport over the course of our lives. And so it was you said 2015. That's when the podcast started, but kind of prep that went into it started in 2014.
Production started long before that.
Right. Right. Well, your podcast is launched this year, but you've had ideas ruminating for a while.
That's right.
So it was the off season between 2014 and 2015, those seasons, and the Cubs, that was kind of their emergence. They signed John Lester to a big contract, and it was like, all right, now we're actually trying to compete to win. And at that time, Paul and I lived literally 10 feet, across the hall, same apartment complex. He lived with his wife, and I believe she was pregnant at the time, or maybe had just had their first son, and I was living across the hall. And so it was just kind of a natural fit. I mean, at the time, podcasts were being started, and everyone has an impulse they feel like they have something to say. And so for us, we wanted an outlet to talk about baseball. Cubs were starting to get competitive, and a lot of the prospects were coming up. So it was just kind of a natural fit, and probably deep down, it was an excuse for us to hang out, once a week and kind of plan something like that. So it was fun to do that together.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think you're spot on. We were also, a year or two removed from college, so I just think we had quite a bit more free time maybe than we do now. Not to say you need free time to do a podcast, but it was just a kind of a fun outlet for a season. I don't think we ever had like grand ambitions about it. It was kind of just this two brothers talking baseball once a week. So yeah, it's a fun run.
Yeah. Well, there's something about that season of life, college, just after college, where, at least for me, you just have more of a mindset of, oh, why not? Why not try this? Why not do this? And I think sometimes as we get older, we lose some of that, or we tend to overthink things. And so there was something cool about, you guys didn't overthink it. It's like, oh, this sounds fun. This would be interesting. Let's try it. And, meanwhile, I spent another 10 years probably overthinking, overanalyzing it. And there was something cool about you guys just saying, you know what, we want to do this. We're not quite sure where it's going. Let's jump in the water and go. So I remember again at the time just thinking, man, it's cool that they just went for it. Here we are now, a number of years later. I think your final episode was in 2018. So, here we are 6 years after that. As you think back on that run with the podcast, what would you each say is maybe the one thing that sticks out most about that experience?
You asked one thing. Two things popped into my head when I was thinking
Sorry,
about.
Paul. He's using up yours too.
Yeah. This is usually how the podcast went too. I had more more airtime than Paul. The first would be just the grind of it. I remember usually Sunday afternoons is when we recorded, and we'd record for a couple hours. There was prep beforehand about what we're going to talk about. Because I think even at that time, it was in our heads like, well, this has to be unique. We're not just, no one's going to listen to this podcast at all, probably. But they're definitely not going to listen to it if it's so generic, just two random guys talking baseball. We have to bring some unique content to it. So we were always trying really unique things, and that added to the prep time. So there's prep time, there was record time, and then afterwards, I would edit the podcast. And if I could go back, I probably would try to make that process simpler, but that would take several hours too. So pretty much the whole Sunday, and usually, some of the
no AI back then to swoop in and
nope. So it was kind of a whole weekend thing, and so it was a grind. But because of that, I'm really proud that we did it, and that we got the 139 episodes. Now, some of those, the last probably 30 of those, we started just recording phone calls with each other. It was kind of a unique, again, going back to the unique thing. It was in the playoffs. It was just like every morning after several playoff games the night before, what are we talking about? And so we just recorded a phone call, and that was kind of that was another unique thing that we tried. So it was a weekly baseball podcast for 3 years. It's kind of,
it's impressive.
Kind of what it was. So really proud that we did it, but it was a grind. It was a lot of hard work.
Yeah, the content grind was real. I don't know, Peter, if you remember some of our segments. I remember we did MacGyver episodes in 3 minutes. Now, what that has to do with a weekly baseball podcast, I have no idea.
Well, but yeah, this is a good example. One segment idea we had was like, all right, every TV show or movie, well, there are baseball movies, but then there are also TV shows and movies that aren't about baseball, but will have baseball themed episodes.
Oh.
And so for each episode of the podcast, hey, let's take a segment and just talk about, the Boy Meets World baseball episode that they did, or the
Psych did one.
Murder, She Wrote.
I mean, most of the shows in the 90s and 2000s had baseball episodes. The Simpsons had it's probably the most famous one. But as part of that, MacGyver had a couple baseball episodes. So it started
he was a hockey player.
He did a lot of things.
But I'll tell you the one thing he never did. Never shot a gun.
That's true.
No.
That's true.
That's where he drew the line.
But the MacGyver thing, went from there because Kevin really liked that segment. And so he would call in and he would just he would recap. We'd recap together MacGyver, and it's supposed to be 3 minutes, but it would drag on.
One big takeaway that I had, and I feel like, John, we've talked about this with your podcast, is just how unpredictable listener engagement is. Quick story: I was at an Illini basketball game right before Thanksgiving, so just a couple weeks ago, sitting next to a friend who had brought his dad to the game. I had never met him before, from Central Illinois. maybe familiar with like the Elliott family, but never met him before. First question he asked me was, "Are you guys still doing the baseball podcast?" And, you know, it almost caught me off guard, but loyal listener for all 3 years that we did it.
Wow.
A couple months back, similar thing happened, kind of an acquaintance, you know, in town asked a similar question. He was actually overseas in the Middle East as we were recording, and just asked about if we'd ever revive the podcast. And I often found that the people I expected to be listening rarely listened. Not throwing you under the bus, John. I was going to ask you, of the 100...
There may be I don't know. There may be a few I still need to go back and grab.
All right. I could never convince Kate, my wife, to listen to any of them.
I listened to the ones I was on, I can tell you that.
So I often found the people I expected to be listening weren't, but then I was always surprised at the people who were intrigued enough. And, you know, it's not like our audience was huge, but there were always, you know, maybe a dozen or two people that I would have never predicted would be interested in a baseball podcast that were listeners. So
you guys were sustaining the spirits of servicemen across the world. Who knew?
If I could throw out, if people are interested in the podcast.
Of course, go ahead and plug it. I see the website's still live.
Oh, I pay the renewal fee every year. Just don't tell my wife about it. For our 100th episode, we listed off our 100 favorite things about baseball. So that would be a good touch point. And then a couple of our favorite interviews. We did interview a former major league player, pitcher. So you can check that out, Daniel Winkler. And then probably my favorite memory, the one I think about most, we interviewed a very bad baseball movie from the 90s, Talent for the Game. The star pitcher in that movie, somehow through his agent online, I found his contact information, and he agreed to an interview, and it was just a fascinating 30 or 40-minute interview of him talking about the movie and his experience doing it. Probably my favorite moment from that interview was he talked about how his dad always dreamed of watching him play in the major leagues, which of course didn't happen. But he actually went. The movie was filmed on Dodger Stadium, where the Dodgers play, and his dad got to go to the filming of that, and so he actually did get to see him pitch in the major leagues, and so he was getting emotional talking about it. And so I don't know, just the like Paul was saying, the crazy places podcasting will take you with both listeners, but also the people you engage with. It's just a really fun outlet to meet people, talk about things that you enjoy and that they enjoy. And I'm sure it made his day that people wanted to talk to him about this movie that he made 20 years ago.
Okay, well, hey, maybe just something to think about. You guys are back on here doing an episode. Maybe it's time for a throwback reunion pod. Maybe at least 139 is such a awkward number to end on. At least get to 140 maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've clearly established you two are the podcasting pioneers in our family. You're the experts. You did 139 episodes. This is number 6 for me. So let's break down the film on season 1 here of Life Well Led. Give me each of you give me your grade and be honest, and maybe your favorite episode of the 5 up to this point.
Definitely a passing grade from me. I'll give it a solid B plus, and I'd say closer to an A than a C. So maybe like a 90%.
Yep.
Have really enjoyed listening along. Have a ton of respect for you putting yourself out there like you have. Favorite episodes so far. Listen to all of them. I would say the one with Elliot Grudem probably sticks out the most. I think I resonated with just about everything he was saying in terms of hospitality, diversity and leadership, and just thought you could tell you guys have a rapport from having worked together. So I thought that episode as a whole was probably my favorite.
Okay. B plus, I'll take it. Peter?
I had a solid B. So
okay. Maybe like an 80, 88, 87.
Yeah, something like that. I think it was clear that this first season you were getting your podcasting legs under you. You didn't have the reps that Paul and I had from a while ago.
Maybe if I had listened to more of yours, I would have been more prepared.
Well, it's just anything you do, it just takes some time, and you're figuring out, how you want to do these interviews, what types of questions you like asking, things like that. But I thought overall it was really, really solid, and I got something from every episode. My favorite one was the last one you did with Brad Dancer. I loved the back and forth you guys had about competition and bringing out the best in each other. And in general, it just felt like that whole episode, both of you were really excited to be able to talk about the topics that you guys were talking about. So I thought that really came through in the episode.
Cool. Any advice? There will be a season 2, listeners. Still trying to figure out when that will come out and kind of how we want to frame it. But while we're talking about it, any advice from either of you going into the next round here?
Going off what I just said with Brad, I would say focus on having conversations that you yourself are really interested in having.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners will be able to pick up on that. I think sometimes when you're doing a podcast or you're writing, you maybe think through like, oh, what's the audience? What do they want to hear? What would they find interesting? And I think the world of podcasting needs more people that are just doing things that they enjoy and find interesting, and then that flows to the listeners.
Huh.
It's good. It's good. If I had to give one piece of advice, it would just be, more and more reps with asking good questions and kind of like pacing of questions. I think there's a real art to asking questions. You'll see, whether it's like a, press conference or sideline reporter or, a journalist, like you can sort of pinpoint the ones that have had reps doing it, kind of know how to poke and prod at a guest and get the most out of them. And I think just from my vantage point, I've seen you like from episode 1 to 6, just get better and better at that. There's times to lean in and like ask a follow-up question. There's times to pull back. There's times to, you ask a question, but then you sort of like give them time to think about it. So all of that, I think, factors into kind of your style of podcasting where you're bringing guests on. So I would just say, continue to lean into that, continue improving there. And I think all your conversations have been great so far, but just an opportunity to keep getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it is just finding your voice and your lane, and there's different people do it different ways, and there's certain best practices, but you have to kind of figure out what your voice is with it. Something I wrestle with is how much to be a participant in the conversations.
Yeah.
Right? Is it just ask a good question and shut up and get out of the way, or is it no, this is like we're having coffee back and forth and just some other people are listening, and I kind of gone back and forth with that. So that's something I would say I'm still in the process of kind of fine tuning for.
What grade would you give yourself?
I would give it a B. I am proud that we did it. I think that's the hardest part. And there's a lot of people who say, oh, it would be fun to do a podcast someday. It would be fun to do a newsletter. I was that person for years. And so I think probably the thing I feel most proud about is just, we did it. We got started. That's normally the hardest part. And I think I'm learning a lot with every newsletter, with every podcast. I'm learning, and some things are getting refined. And for those who don't know, I should just mention it. Paul has actually been a part of kind of helping shape my thinking and strategy around this whole Life Well Led thing, and is often behind the scenes making what you ultimately hear and read better. And so I'd be remiss in not mentioning that, here on this episode. So,
John, real quick before we get off the podcast,
mm-hmm.
One thing, a quote that I have to go back to in kind of the vein of like content creation that I find just be super helpful, and it describes sort of like the creative tension of starting anything really well. It comes from a novel by Daniel Nayeri, Everything Sad is Untrue. But the quote is, I think making anything is a brave thing to do, for it assumes there's a world worth making it for. And, you probably don't think of yourself as, brave in your podcast studio, but I do think there's a real grind, and there's sort of an edge to starting anything. So thanks for sharing Life Well Led with all of us, and I really do have valued sort of the community you formed. So wanted to say that publicly.
Cool. It's kind of you to say. Thanks for your role in helping to give it to the world. So, all right. Well, this is a leadership podcast, so I wanted to talk leadership a little bit, and I thought, with you two being twins, us being brothers, an interesting angle here could be leadership through the lens of birth order. So again, as twins and as youngest brothers, there are four of us. I'm the oldest. Just be curious to hear your guys' thoughts. How did either of those factors sort of affect your perspective and development as leaders growing up?
I would say it's a good question to think about, I think, for anyone out there. The context that you're born into and that you exist, I think definitely affects the way you approach leadership. And I think as the youngest, my leadership, or maybe our leadership, Paul and I's leadership, those muscles weren't really flexed until college. Looking back, I wish, like on sports teams and at school and things like that, that I would have been a more intentional leader and would have tried to more expressively communicate that to teammates and classmates and things like that. But yeah, I think as the youngest, you just kind of grow up and you're in other people's footsteps. And whereas if you're the oldest, there's kind of a burden to that. But there's, I think, some benefit to knowing what that type of leadership feels like and how to go about that. So I think as the youngest, that as one side of it. And then I think as a twin, and one of four boys, I think I grew up not really being known individually, but more just collectively, like, oh, that's one of the twins, or that's one of the four Elliot brothers. And that has a lot of benefits to it, but it also has some drawbacks of not feeling like coaches or teachers or people that were leading me actually knew who I was and knew what I was good at. An example, a funny story, is for senior year in high school, our football team, Paul and I both played defensive line, and our head coach, knew that we both played defensive end, one side and the other, but couldn't really tell us apart beyond that. And so at the all conference meetings where they vote on first team, second team, all conference or whatever, he essentially said, I'm not sure, I couldn't tell you, which one was better than the other. So just vote one first team and one second team. And so Paul got the first team nod, and I got the second team nod. When my stats were better, slightly better across the board. So
hey, I was getting sacks in big time games. You were padding your stats against the bottom feeders.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and look at the Pro Football Focus
check the tape
metrics and see how you guys graded out back then.
Yeah. Anyway, so those sorts of things stick with you, and I think that's one area where leadership now, if I'm in leadership roles, I do think I try to see people and remember. I'm genuinely curious about things about their life and try to remember things about their life, so that they're not just one of a dozen people on a team, or not just an employee at whatever place I'm at, but it's someone that actually has a life and details about their life. And so I try to remember those things, and I think people appreciate when you do. And I appreciate when people remember things about my life. It makes me feel seen and known.
Well, I will say, knowing a little bit about your kind of leadership team context right now, I think that's something you do an excellent job of. And I think if there are any of your team members listening, I'm guessing they would agree with that. So
I hope so.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. Couple other thoughts I had. It's a great question. I think I've always been more comfortable like stepping into like a pre-existing culture, team, and I think a lot of that might come from the fact that as the youngest of four, I'm stepping into a family system, sibling group that already exists, and so I may be most comfortable in those settings versus kind of starting something new, starting something from scratch. So yeah, maybe upholding the status quo versus trailblazing. And have always kind of found my lane as like a peacemaker, bridge builder, and I think a lot of that comes from being the youngest of four.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question there? That sounds right to me. Do you view that as more of a positive or a negative thing?
I think it's neither. I think it's something to be aware of. Right, like just because I'm experiencing discomfort in starting something new doesn't mean that that's not a sign that it's not going to pan out or not going to work. So just kind of being aware of myself. I do think like the world needs people to, step into situations that already exist and like just keep the train on the tracks. I think that's a useful person to have on a team. But yeah, the other thing I was thinking about is because all of the Elliot brothers, the four of us, are wired similarly, or I guess maybe have similar interests. So we all can talk books, we all can talk leadership, maybe listen to the same podcasts. Just a lot of similarities between us, probably more so than most sibling groups. I found that I didn't really know my giftings and my wirings until I maybe like left home, like went to college, and then I start to see, okay, yeah, I actually am, gifted in these ways. These are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. And growing up, maybe it was more just assumed, right, that like everybody's like this. Or as I look to like you and Kevin, you're maybe a little bit better at these things than I am. So maybe it's not a strength of mine. So I just, in terms of discovering my own, interests and gifting, strengths, that sort of thing, that didn't maybe come until later on because of our sibling group.
I'm curious, being twins, you're obviously, in a lot of the same groups and just situations. And were there times where there was sort of the expectation or the need that like one of you would take the lead, or who's going to kind of take charge here? Or maybe that wasn't so much a dynamic. I was just, are there moments you can think of where it's like, okay, one or the other here has to kind of take charge, and if so, how would that typically work itself out?
I don't think so. I think we were like always on the same teams and in the same classes and same friend circles, but I don't think we ever had situations where one of us needed to lead. Now, like the podcast is a good example where Paul is more comfortable with me taking the reins and starting something, and like he's saying, kind of step into that where he wouldn't be the one to be like the leader of it. And like, every episode of the podcast, I would start and say, hello, I'm Peter, and this is Paul. So it's kind of like a good example of maybe a little bit how we're wired.
You are the oldest, so I guess that makes some sense.
Yeah, by 2 minutes. So
the one I agree with that for the most part. The one example I just thought of though was in some ways I owe my marriage to your leadership. Probably our best twin story. When I was 16.
Oh yeah.
Long story short, when I was 16, was moving toward dating a girl in high school, and we set up a time to talk on the phone for the first time. Back then, that's a really big deal. And as like the hour got closer and closer, I just got more and more nervous. I was pretty skittish, 16-year-old. And at the last minute, I just asked Peter, like, hey, she's going to call me at 9. You got you got to kick off the conversation, break the ice for the first 10 or 15 minutes, kind of lead the way, and then I'll jump in. And that's exactly what happened. And gosh, 15 years later, that's now my wife of 12 years. So, yeah, and I guess in that regard, you did lead the way, and I'm better for it.
But she thought I was you. That was the whole. Our voices were similar, and that's one thing about podcasting. One piece of feedback we got negatively was that our voices sounded too similar on the podcast, so it was unclear who was, making whatever point.
It's like the all-conference voting all over again.
Yeah, right.
It's funny.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's close this out by talking about a topic that our whole family is very passionate about, and that is sports. So just kind of a few fun ones, but maybe it's still something we can learn, or our audience can glean from it. Who would you guys say is the best leader in professional sports right now? Could be a coach, could be a GM, could be an owner. Could be a player.
Can we officially include college sports as a professional sport now?
Sure, because that's basically where we're at.
In that regard, hands down, Josh Whitman. I feel
hands down. Okay.
Whatever we are paying him, not nearly enough. I would say, in terms of true professional sports, I'm a huge fan.
Hold up. Talk. What is it about Josh Whitman that what are the features of his leadership that make him great?
Well, I mean, the most obvious one is just we're far more successful than we've been in a long, long time. But then I would say the pathway to that is having a clear vision and then sort of demanding respect or eliciting respect from the people you lead. At least in Champaign-Urbana, I feel like there are a few people that command more respect than Josh when he enters a room. So
I think he really cares too. Like he
invests.
He's got skin in the game. He played football at Illinois, so it's not a normal athletic director. I feel like treats it like a business, which you have to, but Whitman really wants to win. He has a passion for that. He cares about it. He feels excited when Illinois wins, whether he's leading it or not. And I think that's a great quality for a leader of a athletic department.
Lots of hugs involved.
Lots of hugs. Yep.
Yeah. You don't hug if you don't care.
This was you had posed this to us ahead of time, and this was fascinating to think about, because we're kind of in an era where there's not Belichick, or like there's not an answer that you would immediately think to run to. So I kind of thought about it in two different ways. One, the first name that popped in my head was Andy Reid with the Chiefs, and I think the next question for me was like, why is he successful? Big jelly guy, what? And he was successful before he came to the Chiefs too. So it's not like it was just Kansas City and Mahomes. And I think, without knowing a ton about what life is like inside that organization, I think he creates an environment where guys are comfortable, and they thrive and enjoy doing what they do. And I think a lot of the players that they, bring in, kind of role players, love being there to the point where they're always kind of coming back and forth, picking up receivers and stuff. That used, he played with the Chiefs, now he's back because he loves it. Just that sort of vibe where people enjoy being part of the organization and enjoy winning, obviously. So I think making the organization, making people feel comfortable and enjoy being there. But then I think he's also probably just a mastermind offensively. And so I think there's a competence you have to bring to leadership that I kind of appreciate about him, where he's just better at calling an offense and developing quarterbacks than pretty much anyone else in the NFL. And then the second way I thought about it, kind of going to the baseball, I felt like I would not be true to my roots with the podcast if I didn't mention baseball. I've always enjoyed the leaders of the small market teams. So in baseball, there's not a salary cap. And so you have teams like the Mets who just gave Juan Soto, $1 billion. And then you have other teams, Soto's going to make more than a lot of other teams, their whole salary.
Are you breaking that news? I didn't hear the Mets got him.
No, that's $750 million, 15 years.
Right. So those small market teams, though, are way more competitive than you would think. Like the Guardians and the Rays, you think had better records than the Mets last year or close to it. And I've always thought it would be more fun to be part of those organizations making decisions regarding who to sign and drafting, because it's a lack of resources kind of makes you the underdog, but also it makes you have to be so much tighter and better with your decision making. There's a pressure to each decision that I think I would enjoy more than if you have all this flexibility to fail. I'm like, oh yeah, it's so easy just to go and spend the most money on the best player. But I would enjoy the small market side of it.
So who's your guy? Chris Getz?
Currently, I think whoever's running the Guardians. You brought the AL side when you were podcasting, so you can tell me who there. But like Terry Francona was the manager of the Guardians for a while, and even when the Cubs went up against him in the World Series, there was a respect for him that he was just getting the absolute most out of his team. So now he's back. Francona's back with the Reds, so looking forward to Cubs Reds matchups.
Francona just can't. He
can't quit.
Leave it.
Can't quit.
He can't leave it. It's gonna die in a dugout.
Who's your guy, John?
The first guy that comes to mind for me is Brad Stevens. What I love about Brad is he's obviously smart, and has been ahead of the curve on, some of the trends in basketball. But what I love about Stevens is it's not about him. Whether he was coaching a Butler, coaching the Celtics, moving to the front office, his whole demeanor is just how can we enhance what the players are doing, let them shine, what supports processes are going to help them do that. And I think he's just genuinely fine if no one pays any attention to him. Even the decision to voluntarily step out of the coaching role, which is more visible, into the front office because he thought that's where his gifts were best used. Mm-hmm. And there could be another coach who could offer something he couldn't. And that was going to set the players up for the best chance of success. There's a humility in that and a self-awareness in that and a willingness to kind of let the players shine that I've always respected. And I don't think it's any coincidence that his teams, are consistently very successful as a result.
Yep. I like that one. Dan Campbell was another one that came to mind.
Different flavor there.
Different flavor. But similar to Stevens, though, I feel like in terms of being true to who he is, right? He's not trying to be somebody he's not. What you see authentic. Is what you see is what you get. So
when it's rare, the way his players talk about him, it reminds me of the way, a high school football mayor may talk about, like, those guys would run through the proverbial wall for him.
Yeah.
And again, that's just not normal for NFL players, where it tends to just be more business transactional. And so he's clearly doing something there to inspire their trust and confidence, and you have to respect that.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. As you guys know, maybe some listeners do or don't know, my day job, I run a consulting practice where we work with leadership teams to help them get healthier so they can be more cohesive and effective and efficient. So of all the professional franchises out there, which one do you think is in most need of Untapt's help?
I feel like that's a tough one because, there's no shortage of dysfunctional franchises, especially in Chicago.
Yeah, we don't need to look outside our state to find this.
Right. I saw a stat the other day that besides Billy Donovan and the Bulls, every other professional team in Chicago has fired their coach within the last 18 months, which seems remarkable. But so no shortage of dysfunctional franchises, but I feel like you probably do your best work, or Untapt does their best work with not like straight up dysfunctional organizations, but those that, what's the Patrick Lencioni motto? The hungry, smart,
Humble, hungry, smart, yeah.
Yeah. So you're helping those people unlock something. So that probably, I'm steered away from the Reinsdorf and McCaskey families. So yeah, maybe a team that has been good but not great. So like Phillies, Ravens, teams like that just need the good to great transition, and that are in a spot where they're ready to receive some leadership help.
Well, I think you answered a slightly different question. You answered what franchise might be most likely to reach out for the kind of help you have to offer. And that's absolutely how it works in my business, for whatever it's worth. It's typically the rich get richer kind of thing, because in order to be open-minded about someone else helping you get to a new level, you already need to have a certain level of health. And so typically it is kind of a good to great situation, and the really dysfunctional ones are really dysfunctional because they don't recognize they have a problem, or even if they do, they aren't humble enough to ask for help. But let's just assume that everyone's desperate and they take it. Peter, who's the one who needs it most?
Well, I went through with the Chicago teams. I thought through the teams, and then what your business would bring to them. So
okay,
with the Bears, I think they idolize nice guys to lead them, and I think they need some conflict. So I know you talked about that before, where winning championships take leaders that are willing to kind of push each other through conflict. Because conflict, you need people that disagree. You need people that are going to be more kind of assertive. So that was one for the Bears. For their next coach, they probably won't hire the right coach, but that's something you could help them with.
You think they should be looking for more of a Dan Campbell type?
Well, yeah, or even just, I'm sure Andy Reid has people around him that push him, or he pushes them to be better, and it just doesn't feel like the Bears ever kind of push themselves to be the best. The Bulls, just mediocre. So I think they need a clear vision.
Chronically mediocre. Okay.
They need a clear vision for how they're going to win a championship. That's the goal. That should be the goal. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that it's not the goal for them. But how are they going from this point forward? What's their path to winning a NBA championship? And they haven't pursued that, I don't think, in the last 20 years, probably. The Cubs need to be more aggressive, I think. I think they make a lot of good decisions, but you need to help them, kind of like your podcast. They need to go for it. They need to pick their spots and try to, I don't know, jump the market. They try to make their move. Like when we started the podcast, they gave John Lester a bunch of money. Turned out to be a great contract, and that really set the tone for the next 5 seasons for the Cubs.
Yeah, I remember that was a statement signing right there. It was like, all right, we're ready to do this.
And you could have talked yourself out of that. Oh, it's a lot of money for a pitcher. Oh, he's 30 some. Oh, but it was just like, no, this is the time.
Oh, we can't throw to first. It's fine. He'll be fine. We'll figure it out.
And then for the White Sox, I'm honestly not quite sure what they need. So Paul, maybe you're the White Sox fan. So
we stopped the podcast at the right time. Man, can you imagine doing weekly episodes on a 125 loss team? But I'm actually somewhat optimistic. They've been making some smarter hires, but I think the leadership rot is is sort of on the operations side with Reinsdorf. So if we can just compartmentalize that from the baseball people, I think we'll be better. But it can only go up from here.
Well, shoot. I didn't want us to end on such a depressing note as the White Sox, but here we are. No, thank you guys for coming on today. And again, thank you for paving the path. I'm not sure I would be doing this podcast if not for you guys having gone first and just seeing, oh yeah, this is something that can be done, and it can be fun, and it can be worthwhile. I've had a lot of fun with season 1 of Life Well Led. Again, Paul, really enjoyed collaborating with you on that. Appreciate all the listeners who tuned in. I know it's no small deal to ask someone for 45 minutes of their time and thought, and so to anyone out there who's listened, thank you. There will be a season 2. Got some different ideas about what that could look like, so more details to come on that. But for now, thanks everyone for listening and being a part of the journey here with season 1, and hope everyone has a great Christmas, and we'll talk to you on the other side of the calendar turning here.
Thanks for having us, John.
Yep. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.